So I need you to turn, if you're not already there, on page 1204 and 1205. This poem deviates just a little bit from what we've already been looking at in Vietnam War literature. This is not specifically about having courage during war. And in fact, as we read this, you may find that it kind of changes our already established ideas about courage. Now, when we think about something that is courageous, could someone raise their hand and give me an example of an act that you would think of that is a courageous act? Like, what would you think of that makes it, that is a courageous act?
Being a firefighter.
Yes, firemen who go into burning buildings. We automatically think of that as being something that would take a lot of courage because they're risking their lives to do that. Give me another example of something that is really courageous.
Joining into the military.
Joining the military, which we've been talking a lot about the military and what was going on during the Vietnam War. So joining the military is another profession that we think of that takes a lot of courage. What else do we think of as like a traditional idea, a traditional view of courage?
Like standing for something that everybody else doesn't stand for. Or like believing.
Good. Standing up for something that everyone else does not stand for. Being a leader. Okay, giving your life for someone else's life. Good. All of those are very courageous acts. Those are all true examples of courage. Now what this poet does, and Sexton, actually changes our idea of courage a little bit. And at the end of this, I want you to think about what does she say about courage that maybe is not the traditional view of it. I'm going to read with you, and then we're going to talk about this. It is in the small things we see it. The child's first step, as awesome as an earthquake. The first time you rode a bike, wallowing up the sidewalk. The first spanking, when your heart went on a journey, all alone. When they called you crybaby, or poor, or fatty, or crazy, and made you into an alien. You drank their acid and concealed it. Later, if you faced the death of bombs and bullets, you did not do it with a banner. You did it with only a hat to cover your heart. You did not fondle the weakness inside you, though it was there. Your courage was a small coal that you kept swallowing. If your buddy saved you and died himself in so doing, then his courage was not courage. It was love. Love as simple as shaving soap. Later, if you have endured a great despair, then you did it alone, getting a transfusion from the fire, picking the scabs off your heart, then wringing it out like a sock. Next, my kinsman, you powdered your sorrow. You gave it a back rub. Then you covered it with a blanket, and after it had slept a while, it woke to the wings of the roses and was transformed. Later, when you face old age and in its natural conclusion, your courage will still be shown in the little ways. Each spring will be a sword you'll sharpen. Those you love will live in a fever of love, and you'll bargain with the calendar. And at the last moment, when death opens the back door, you'll put on your carpet slippers and stride out. Now this poem, it covers an entire cycle of something. What is this a cycle of? Where does this poem begin? And then where does this poem end? Come on. Okay, it begins at birth and it ends at death. What gives us an indication that it is starting with birth? What's the first act of courage that we see in this poem? The very first thing. Taking first steps. Now we don't really think of a baby being courageous typically when they take their first steps. And then after that, it uses some figurative language. It's talking about what I picture to be probably middle school. What part of this poem do you think kind of sounds like what you might endure in middle school, elementary school, middle school? When they called you crybaby or fatty and the other insults. And then the poet says you did something. You drank their what? Acid. Now is that literal? Are you literally drinking acid? What is this figuratively saying? What does it mean when it says that you drank their acid? Okay, you did what with their insults? You took them in. We do that, right? When we're insulted, that affects us, and it's like drinking acid. So you took them in, and then what does it say? What does it say? You drank their acid, and then what? Concealed it. You covered it up. It takes courage sometimes to deal with the things that you see or hear, the words that you are faced with as a middle schooler or a high schooler or whatever time in your life. Then it does make one reference to war. How do you know it's talking about going to war at one point? If you face the death of bombs and bullets. That does indicate it is talking about going to war. But it's talking about a little untraditional view of facing bombs and bullets. Then what? If you face their bombs and bullets, what do you do? What is your courage like there? Are you running into war, ready to fight and ready to face death? What's happening there? How are they facing war? Okay, with their hat over their heart, humbly. And then they swallow down their fear like a coal. And they use another example of figurative language when they talk about another soldier giving their life for you. Love as simple as what? Shaving soap. Shaving soap or shaving cream is a really ordinary thing. How often do people typically use shaving cream in adulthood, men?
Every day.
Every day. It's an everyday item. Does shaving cream cost very much money? No. So it's saying that this is a very simple, inexpensive love. And then when you say love as simple as, what kind of figurative language are you using when you're making a comparison using like or as? Casey? Simile. Right. So this is an example of a simile in this. Love as simple as shaving soap. Then at the end, how do you know that at the end it ends with death? What words indicate to you at the end of the poem that it is time to die? Patrick?
When death opens the back door.
When death opens the back door. That's other figurative language. What figurative language is it when it says when death opens the back door? Personification. So at the very end of this poem we see death opens the back door. And death, it doesn't make death scary. It doesn't make death violent. It talks about death in old age. And it's kind of a peaceful passing into death. What about this? What language do they use that shows that it's kind of a peaceful passing into death? How do you approach death? You walk into it wearing what? Your carpet slippers. So you walk into death wearing your carpet slippers. Something that's really simple and relaxed. Good. It's not something that you're fighting. It's something that's very simple and relaxed. All right. That is the last selection of this unit. And tomorrow is going to be our test. So I'm going to back up and show you everything, all the selections that you will need to be familiar with as we go through this. And I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about them as we go back over them. Okay? So the first thing that we're going to look at is from the torchbearer. And if you want to back up in this and underline things in your book or maybe make some notes of this as I'm asking questions, this is going to help you be successful on your test tomorrow. Now, we've been mixing a lot of history in with this because we cannot escape the historical facts of this section. History is critical to understanding this unit. And so history and literature go hand in hand. And in this section, we don't see a lot of fiction, do we? We see nonfiction, we see historical documents, we see news articles, poetry, but we're not steeped in fiction in this particular section. So let's look at this, and this is actually a selection with historical significance talking about Rosa Parks. So remind me, who is Rosa Parks? Why was she a significant historical figure and then significant for our book? What did she do?
No.
Casey? Okay, she was arrested, which started the Montgomery bus boycott. You need to know that. It was Rosa Parks' arrest that led to the Montgomery bus boycott. During what time frame was Rosa Parks arrested? Like, in what time frame was this selection set? When was this, Devon? Give me a decade. David? 1950s. You need to know this happened during the 1950s, okay? The civil rights movement really kicked off during the 1950s. It happened in Montgomery, and it started the Montgomery bus boycott. What was the inequality that African Americans were facing in Montgomery, specifically dealing with buses? What were the different rules for African American people with buses? Give me one example of that, bro. Sit in the back. That was one rule. That wasn't the only one. African American people had to sit in the back of the bus. Justin.
They had an inner
Yes, they had to enter through the back door of the bus.
White person would have said they had to give up their seat.
That's the third one. If a white person wanted to sit down, they had to give up their seat. So there were three major inequalities dealing specifically with buses. The African American people had to sit in the back of the bus, they had to enter by the back door, and if a white person wanted to sit down, they had to get up and give up their seat. Why was Rosa Parks' arrest the one that the NAACP used as their test case? What about Rosa Parks was different? Why did they say, hey, this is the one that we're going to use to launch the boycott? Well, she was arrested, and in that case, that did make her a good candidate, but there was a little more premeditation involved than just that. She was nonviolent, that's good.
More people will take that seriously than if it was a young girl.
Okay, the fact that she was a more mature woman was a positive.
She left the Mars and was like her favorite aunt.
Okay, she was a very likable individual. She had a clean record. There was no history of any kind of criminal activity or anything like that. She was respectable. She had a good job in town. She was a seamstress. So there were a lot of things about Rosa Parks that made her a good candidate. The NAACP chose her on purpose. It was not an accident. They said, Rosa Parks is going to be a good test case. If we're going to fight this inequality in the law, we're going to use her. That's a good fit. Okay? That's what you need to know and remember about this. Now, let's move on to the next selection. The next one that we looked at was from a speech by Dr. Martin Luther King, his memoir. Now, a memoir is an example of a work of literature that is written, basically your memories that have been captured. And this you guys kind of took apart and you were looking for things that Dr. Martin Luther King said that you felt were valuable. There were maybe things that were still relevant today. Things that you could potentially tweet that were his words. Now, he said something about, and as you read this, he said something about accepting injustice. He said that if you accept injustice, both the oppressors and the oppressed are equally what? Does anybody remember what word he used to describe the oppressors and the oppressed if you accept injustice? If you say, you know what, things are unjust, but I'm not going to do anything about it. He said both the oppressors and the oppressed were equally what, Madison?
Oh, wait. I have the oppressed must never allow the conscience of the oppressor to slumber.
Okay, that's good. It's saying the oppressed cannot sleep. They cannot slumber. That's important. Because if they do sleep, if they do rest, they are equally, and this is a hard word to take, it said they're equally evil. That both sides are equally evil if they allow that. He also said that if we lived by the old proverb from the Bible, an eye for an eye, that would leave everyone what? Blind. Good. He also said that if we really lived that, if we really treated people that way, an eye for an eye, then we would all be blind. And then finally, he says, what about violence? He was a supporter of what type of protest? Peaceful, nonviolent, because he said that what does violence actually do? What does violence actually cause? More problems. He said that continued violence does not create permanent peace. It actually causes more problems. It does not create peace. Now I have one question from you about the next selection. And this was the tribute that Alice Walker made to Dr. Martin Luther King. She was talking about her family land. And she was talking about the irony of her family land. She did not actually love her land until she did what? Does anybody remember what she actually had to do before she actually loved her land? In order to love it, in order to appreciate it, she had to do what? Scan through that as your... That's it. In order to love the land, she had to leave it. In order for her to love the land, she had to leave it. All right, Roberto Acuna, farm worker. You guys read this and did a little handout alongside it. A couple of questions about that. What made Roberto Acuna have a negative view about school? Why did he have a negative opinion about school?
Because people would bully him because of the food he had.
Yes, he was bullied by Anglo children because of his food. There were a couple of other things that happened to him that were negative.
He spoke Spanish.
He spoke Spanish, he couldn't speak English. What did he wear to school that was different from what the other students wore to school? It kind of stuck out in his mind. He wore dirty work clothes, he was exhausted from the night before, and he went barefoot to school. So all these things gave him like a negative opinion about school. He had to go barefoot, he was exhausted, he was treated differently and bullied by the Anglo-Saxon children. What did he say the effect of being on welfare was? How did being on welfare make him feel? What did it cause for him, the fact that he was on welfare? He was humiliated. He felt like he lost his dignity. So, to overcome these things that were difficult in his childhood, he joined the Marines. Why did he join the Marines? What was his goal in joining the Marines? That he would what? That was exactly it. He wanted to become a first-class citizen. He did not any longer want to be treated like a second-class citizen. Now, Saturdays and Sundays were a little different than the other days of the week. Why were Saturdays and Sundays special for Roberto and his family? And when I say special, it's actually a negative kind of special. On those days, the children could work from sunrise to sundown. They didn't have to go to school. Now, for us, weekends are special because that's when we typically get to relax. But for the migrant workers, like Roberto Acuna and his family, Sundays and Saturdays were special because the kids could work all day long. Back into our Vietnam era literature, our next slide. We're going to look at Ambush and that story by Tim O'Brien. Alright, at the beginning his daughter, his young daughter, his 9-year-old daughter, asks him a question. What question does she ask her father right there at the beginning of the story that kind of sets this up?
Have you ever killed anyone?
Have you ever killed anyone? Okay? The first question she asks him is, have you ever killed anyone? Why does he lie to his daughter about that? Why does he not tell her the truth? Yes, he feels like she's too young and that it's best that she doesn't actually know the truth. He doesn't want her to know the answer to that question. In this story, what was the name of the partner that he had during the time that this story was said? He had there was another soldier with whom he was partnered during the ambush. What was the name of the other individual he was partnered with? Kiowa. Yes, Kiowa was the name of his partner. Now, if you had to give a word to the mood of this story, how do you think Tim O'Brien feels throughout this story as he is thinking back to this ambush and what he did that day? What does he feel?
Regret.
Regret. He feels regret because what is it that he is questioning? What is the decision that he made that he is questioning the entire time?
Should I have killed that person?
Yes. Should I have actually killed that person? I was not in any imminent danger. Should I have actually killed that person? Okay? So that's the regret that he's feeling at that point in time. Now, the next that we're going to look at is a poem called The Gift in Wartime. What was the relationship between the two people in this poem? What was the speaker of the poem had a relationship with the person that she was talking about. What was that relationship? They were engaged. It was a woman talking about her fiance. What had happened to her fiance we discovered in this poem? What had happened to him? He was killed in the war. In this, she talks about doing something with her wedding dress. What does she talk about doing with her wedding dress, Nick?
To cover his grave.
Using it to cover up his grave. What do you think that wedding dress symbolizes or represents if she's going to use it to cover up his grave?
Her love.
Okay, her love for him. Them being together forever. And the wedding, what happened with their wedding? It never took place, right? So it's representing their wedding that never will take place. Now this next one, I think that we're all going to remember forever. Stay Alive, My Son by Penya Thay. At the opening of this selection, who is Penya Thay afraid of, and what does he fear from them? What's the name of the group that he's afraid of? It's not the Viet Cong in this one because this guy is in Cambodia, but the Viet Cong was the threat during the Vietnam War. So you might remember the name of this group. The Khmer Rouge. Now what does he fear from the Khmer Rouge? What does he think is going to happen?
They're going to murder him.
They're going to kill him. He feels like he is going to be slaughtered by them. It's only a matter of time before he is slaughtered by the Khmer Rouge. So he comes up with a plan. What is his plan A? What is the first thing that he plans to do? Nick?
To run away and leave his wife and child.
He's going to run away and leave his wife and child. What are the names of his wife and child? What are their names? Does anybody remember those? They're a little bit unusual names. Ini and Nawa. Now what does his wife decide when she finds out about his plan? Yes, she says, take me with you. But what about their son? What do they decide to do with their son? Their 5-year-old son. They leave him. Where do they leave him?
In a hospital.
In a hospital. Why? Now that sounds humane. They're going to leave their son in a hospital where he will be safe because they've got to flee through the jungle. But what about that was actually an inhumane choice? It was not a humane choice that they left him at the hospital. Why was that a bad thing? Yes, because hospitals then in Cambodia were where people went to die. So leaving your 5-year-old son in a hospital was not a humane choice. This also shows us the difference in how we as Christians and Americans value the lives of children as opposed to other cultures where that does not always happen. The next group of poems that we're going to look at together The Asians Dying is the next one. Now in this, what does the speaker say about the rain? What does he call the rain in this particular poem? And we talked about why he called it this. Okay, you're close. He does talk about bombs in this, but that's not what he specifically calls the rain. Pointless. He talks about the pointless sound of the rain. And we talked about why the rain was pointless. Why was the rain pointless in this particular selection?
Everything's dead.
Everything was already dead. Rain only does you good if you are alive. Rain does not do you good if everything is already dead. He also uses the term the possessors. Who are the possessors in this poem? Who do the possessors refer to? Devon, do you remember? What are the possessors doing to the villages? Bombing them? Destroying them? It doesn't target any specific group of people. It doesn't give a name for the possessors. But the possessors are the people who are destroying the villages in the Asian Dying. Now what tone do you think this poem has? If you had to attach an emotion to this poem, what would you pick? Grief or sorrow? I think that would be a great way to think of this. The next two are separation and when you go away. Now separation was really short, but it was very powerful. What was the image in separation that they gave us about what a separation is like?
A needle going through you and like being afraid to do everything that you do.
Yes, a needle going through you, and then grief basically being a thread throughout everything that you do in your life. Now, why a needle? What does that needle represent that grief is like? How is a needle like grief? It's painful, it's sharp. So the needle was chosen because it's sharp, just like grief is. And what color is the thread in that poem? What color do they say it is? It's not a literal color. It's the color of... not a literal color. It says it is the color of an emotion. Nick? Close. The color of,
Everything.
pardon? Everything. The thread in this is the color of loss, like the color of the loss that they have felt. Now, in the last poem, When You Go Away, the speaker says that the clock does something. What does the clock begin to do in this particular?
Stand still and not move.
Okay, it kind of goes back to striking the same hour. And why does the clock go back to striking the same hour over and over again? Why is the clock doing that? What has happened that makes them feel like the clock is striking the same hour?
Like the day's over with their work, and it's like all coming undone.
And they're feeling the grief because at that point their love has gone away. So it's because love has gone away. Now, in what phrase of the poem do we realize that the poet actually feels like his actions have been pretty pointless? What, and we talked about this specifically, what line from the poem shows us the pointlessness?
Like the tuck sleeve of an arm.
There we go. Like the tucked sleeve of a one-armed boy. Next. Our next poem. In Tai Ben Peace Province. Now, why was the journalist who wrote this poem actually there? Why did this journalist actually go to Tai Ben to begin with? What was her job there? She was two things. Take pictures, okay? Take pictures and report on what was happening there. So that's why she was there. In the first paragraph, what idea do we get about war? What do we find out? How do we feel about war based on the first paragraph of this?
Very destructive.
Incredibly destructive. What do we see specifically that has been destroyed in the first paragraph of this poem? Hospitals, schools, and factories, okay? Places where innocent people are. They tell us something about a child who has experienced a grievous injury. What has happened to the little girl in this poem? Her feet got blown off. But they talk about it in a way that lets us know what about this type of injury. It was common. It happened all the time. It was something that happened all too many children have been injured by this. Now then, the author is using an extended metaphor in this. And we discover it kind of at the end. It's what she wants to bring back to America with her. What is the extended metaphor that she uses that she wants to bring back to America with her? Peace. And peace is a what? A bird. Peace is a bird. You worked together in studying the proposal for the Vietnam War. And we spent a great deal of time kind of talking about this. Where is the Vietnam War Memorial actually located? Washington, D.C. Okay? What substance is it made of? Black granite. Now, how would you describe this memorial? What is it like? What is it like? What did they do with it?
It's simple, but it has like a lot of names on it.
Okay, who are the names of?
The people who died.
The people who died. How did they arrange the names of the people who died on this wall? What order? How did they put them up there? They just like randomly carve them in there. What order?
Chronologically,
By what?
the day they died.
They are chronologically arranged by the day they died. What was the name of the artist who actually designed this memorial? Maya Lin. Good. How many memorials had she designed before this? None. This was her first memorial to design. She was 21. Now, why did she design it? What was her intent in her plan? What did she want it to look like? Like a scar in the earth. And she wanted it to basically do what? On one side and then on the other side. What is it doing? It's receding and rising, right? It's rising from the earth and then receding back into it. That was her goal because she wanted it to look like a scar in the earth. Now yesterday, we listened to a Bob Dylan song. And we talked about the fact that this song really wasn't important necessarily because of Bob Dylan's musicianship. It was instead important because of his message, because of the idea that he was trying to convey. So, with the title, A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. What is that talking about? What is the hard rain that he is warning us about in this poem?
Is it bombs?
Bombs. Nuclear bombs. I said that we could have renamed this poem, Look Out, You're Gonna Get Nuked, because Bob Dylan was very concerned about the threat of nuclear war. And during that time frame, the threat of nuclear war was something that everyone kind of had in the back of their mind. What time frame, what was going on in the world that caused Bob Dylan to write a song about the threat of nuclear war? What kinds of things were all going on one after the other and simultaneously? Give me some examples of those world events. Okay, so we started with Pearl Harbor and the bombings there, and then we dropped bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then after that, that started what kind of war did we have with Russia? Cold War, okay? So the Cold War began in the mid-1940s and extended all the way into the late 1980s. So that was going on. And then we added in some civil unrest. What kind of civil unrest was going on in the United States of America? The Civil Rights Movement. Because it was imperative that equality be granted to African Americans. And so there was a lot of civil unrest here. And then there was another conflict that was going on that only further added to the unrest and division among the American people. What else was happening overseas that directly affected us here that we've been reading a lot about? The Vietnam War. So we've got the Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War, the Cold War. It was a time that America was in a good bit of turmoil. So he writes this song. Now, you're going to need to be able to identify, and we did this with poetry, as you had a partner activity, you're going to need to be able to identify alliteration, assonance, and consonants. You remember those three things. Now, let's talk for a minute about what those things look like so that you will know when you see them in a poem. What is alliteration? Give me a definition for that so that I'll know what I'm looking for if I've got to see it. What does alliteration look like? Close. Repetition is the repetition of a word in a line. Alliteration is a little bit more specific.
Like the first word?
The first letter. There you go. Alliteration is the repetition of the first letter of a word in a line. Sally sells seashells by the seashore. That's an example of alliteration. Pastors a lot of times use alliteration in their sermons because if they have different points, then that helps you remember them if they use something like alliteration and start them all with the same first letter. So you need to be able to identify that. The next one is assonance. Does anybody remember what assonance is? What part of the word is repeated with assonance?
The middle of the word.
The middle of the word, the sound. The ruffle of drums. What sound am I repeating there? Okay? And then consonants. What am I looking for if I'm trying to identify consonants in a line of literature? Emily? The same ending sound. Now here's how I keep these straight. Put them in alphabetical order, and that's the part of the word it deals with. Which word is first alphabetically out of alliteration, assonance, and consonants? Alliteration, and it deals with the first part of the word. Assonance is second alphabetically, and it deals with what part of the word? The middle. And then consonants is what alphabetically? Third, and it deals with what part of the word? The last part. So of those three terms, if you put them in alphabetical order, that helps you remember which part of the word you're looking at that's going to be repeated in the line of poetry. So you're going to need to be able to identify alliteration from A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. Guess what else you're going to have to be able to identify? What did we talk about with A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall specifically? A literary term, a literary device that we were looking for. There's a term that we talked about several times this week. You're close. Starts with a J. Juxtaposition. Okay, juxtaposition. What does that mean? When you use juxtaposition, what was Bob Dylan doing when he used juxtaposition in A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall? Yes, when he compares two completely different things, like complete opposites. You're going to be given a group of lines, a section of lines, and you've got to figure out which of those 4 lines uses juxtaposition. So you're going to have to read those lines from the poem and say, not that one, not that one, not that one, yep, that one. So you'll have to be able to identify juxtaposition in this. There were some pretty disturbing images in this, and he was using metaphor. When he talks about the child beside the dead, what? Pony. What could a child beside a dead pony represent? What is he contrasting with the idea of a child beside a dead pony? What other concepts could those represent? Okay, childhood. Childhood, when we think of childhood, what other things do we think of? Kids are full of happiness and what else? Energy and what? Laughter, what else? Playfulness, life, okay? So a child could represent life, and then on the other side we've got what? Death, a dead pony. So we've got life and death kind of contrasting right there. What kind of a mood does the phrase, a newborn baby with wild wolves all around it? We talked about that phrase specifically yesterday. How does that make you feel?
Like, isn't like dangerous before the kids and stuff?
Right, that's alarming because the baby is in imminent danger. He was warning the American people, hey, this is something we've got to pay attention to. We are really in trouble here. So this is something we've got to notice. Who were they talking about, or who was he talking about in the phrase, the room full of men with hammers a-bleeding? Who was in the room full of men with hammers a-bleeding?
The high powers like government.
Right, the politicians, the political leaders, the people who are actually in charge. Those are the ones that he was actually referring to. Now what we talked about courage today at the beginning, that is also going to be on your test. Does anybody have any questions about any of the selections that I went over? Anything that you want to ask about?